Hey gang, welcome to week 6. We're getting there. This is a cool week because we are redrawing our self-portraits this week. I get really excited. This is one of my favorite weeks because I get to see the contrast between your week 1 and your week 6 self-portrait. So very, very exciting time. Before I jump into this week, I did start getting some grading done this morning. So I did your discussion boards on John Singer Sargent, and those were really fun to read. The things I picked up on is, practicing spontaneity and kind of this fearless approach that Sargent teaches you to not sweat the details so much and to focus on them, but think of like the broader picture and also kind of the emotional gesture that's behind it that can really infuse a lot of life into your work. So nice job. I think you guys really kind of got what Myatt was, going for in that episode. And so I'm really excited to be looking at your actual copies of Madam X. So that's always a fun one, and I think students usually do a pretty darn good job on those. So I'll be looking at those over the next couple of days. Again, all grading should be back to you by Friday. And let's jump into week 6. Okay, so we're talking about lights, shadows, and the gestalt. What this term gestalt is, it's basically this idea that we perceive the organized whole as more than just the sum of its parts. And it's going to talk about this in the reading. But for example, if you do a Google image search for gestalt, when you look at this picture, you're perceiving the triangle. You're perceiving more than just these Pac-Man type shapes, right, that are the individual pieces. And while we've been talking a lot about breaking things down into their individual parts, it's important to keep in mind the whole that they are creating, and we're actually going to do some of those drawings today. So again, it's how we see the panda here in the World Wildlife Federation image, that it's really just we're using the negative space here to create the whole of the panda, but we're perceiving the whole shape here, and that's the idea of gestalt in a very small nutshell. So you're going to be reading chapter 10, Perceiving Light, Shadows, and the Gestalt this week. And your sketch assignment, if you remember from last week, I kind of dialed it back. You only need to do 5 sketches, so you didn't have to do any from last week, so you don't need 10, you only need 5. Our topic this week or theme is things in motion. So imagine capturing a bird mid-flight. How would you draw a top that is spinning, for example, things that are, moving in motion because, someone running maybe. This week's study, we study the way objects or creatures move. It could be as simple as a flower blowing in the wind, but really try and think about these objects not just being stagnant, about being these kind of living, breathing things, even if they're inanimate objects, that they can move in space. So we want to start considering that. And the reason this is good is because even when you're thinking of, for example, when we looked at Madam X last week, and she's in this very, kind of curved pose, but you can almost imagine her waltzing, her way or slinking down those stairs and then kind of looking off to one side very quickly and nonchalantly. There's this emotive kind of kinetic movement to her, the way that Sargent has formed her. And so starting to think about how things move is going to be really helpful in your drawing. Okay, so we're going to copy some Gestalt portraits this week. So you're going to do workbook exercise 31, which is Charlie Chaplin in Light and Shadow. So you're literally going to copy that image from one side of the page to the other. Don't trace it. That's, doesn't help anybody. And then pick a photo that's in that style, and you're going to copy it in that style. Or I'm sorry, the photo doesn't have to be in that style, but pick something, keep it very simple, but then you want to, try and use that same style where you're kind of using this idea of negative space to create an image. And when you look at this, it'll make sense. And that's kind of what we were just looking at with those Gestalt pictures. So you're going to try and think, what do I really need in here to communicate the whole of this object, and what can I get away with not including, or including just in negative space. So negative space, it's like that vase face portrait or picture, where you are creating one or the other. You're either creating the faces or the vase, but the gestalt of it allows us to see more than the sum of the parts, right, in this whole where we can see both faces and a vase. So I hope I'm not making this more confusing. If you struggle with this or have any questions, please let me know. Or if you're kind of working or want to, show me a picture and, hey, will this work? You think this will be simple enough for me to break down? I'm more than happy to take a look at that for you. Okay, so you know how to do all your submission by now. Create. So we're doing lights and shadows this week, and this is where, drum roll, we get into our portraits again. So exercise 30, drawing eggs lighted. I believe shouldn't that be lit from above? You don't have to include a full dozen eggs here, but I would, try and do a half dozen at least, or at least maybe 3 or 4. Don't just give me a drawing of 1 egg. And really make sure that you give it strong directional lighting, because this is going to be something that will help us when we get to those portraits that we're drawing in light and shadows. It's just practice for that. So definitely make sure that you do these in order and don't just, dial it in halfway. Really go for it with these. Okay, so exercise 32 is proportions of the head in full face view. So this, again, remember, this is just getting the proportions. You're not doing a full-blown drawing. You're just working out those proportions. And then in 33, you're going to be using those proportions to actually draw a full face portrait. So if you want to kind of draw it over exercise 32, what you've done in that and breaking down those proportions, you can do that. Just make sure that you show me exercise 32 first and photograph it separately. So then 34, this is like, the creme de la creme here. This is drawing your self-portrait in lights and shadows. So really read those instructions. Make sure that you do your reading this week first, because I think that's going to be helpful. And take your time. Really allow yourself, if you're someone who takes a little more time, allow yourself some good time for this one, because I really want to see you guys put in full effort. Please don't just do this one halfway or be rushed and then, think like, I don't really have time to finish this, so I'm just going to kind of do a little something. This is the one, if anything, make sure you really get done, because this is what you're going to be looking at back from your week 1 self-portrait and this one. And you're going to be comparing those two. And where you're going to be doing that is in your critique this week. So done as a blog as usual. So you're going to include that week 1 self-portrait, and you're going to include your workbook exercise 34 side by side, or one before the other. And that way we can all kind of see where you've improved, and it's always really exciting and celebratory. So it's really helpful if you kind of, give each other a pat on the back and celebrate each other's successes in this one especially. So, because it's kind of nerve-wracking putting those pre-instruction self-portraits and the ones from this week up there. So let's be super supportive of each other. And the same questions as usual, just an additional, how did you feel after completing this assignment? Have your skills changed since creating your first self-portrait during week 1? Okay, and then make sure you comment on your peers' work. Be really, let's critique, not criticize, and be super supportive. So that's what we got going on this week. This is a good week. This is really, a strong week for you guys, and I think you're going to do really well. I'm excited to see it. Be looking for your feedback from last week's work, and have a great week, everyone.